They sold him like an animal, not because he was weak, not because he was uneducated, not because he had no name. They sold him because the world had learned how to turn even a free, educated African man into property. When Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Sori stepped onto that ship, he was not a slave. He was a son, a student, a man raised to lead, and the system that captured him never expected one thing: that he would remember exactly who he was. Most people who entered those ships disappeared, not just their bodies, but their identities. Names were stripped, languages were beaten out, memories were buried under whips and fear. But Abdul Rahman did something dangerous. He remembered, in a world built on erasing people, memory itself became rebellion. Before chains, there were mountains. In the highlands of Futa Jalon, in what is now Guinea, Abdul Rahman grew up in a home where knowledge mattered. His father was a respected leader. Men traveled long distances to seek his judgment. His mother taught him patience, discipline, and the meaning of honor. From childhood, Abdul Rahman was taught that a man's worth was not measured by wealth, but by responsibility. He learned to read and write Arabic while other boys his age were still learning basic trades. He studied law, history, faith, and diplomacy. He learned how to ride, how to negotiate, and how to stand in front of elders without lowering his eyes. He was not trained to serve. He was trained to lead. In his world, leadership was not about power. It was about duty. A man belonged to his people before he belonged to himself. The land itself carried memory. Every river had a story. Every hill had a name. Every family carried history, alliances, betrayals, and old promises. Abdul Rahman knew where his ancestors were buried. He knew where prayers had been whispered for generations. He knew that his life was part of something larger than himself. He did not yet understand how quickly a life could be stolen. As a young man, Abdul Rahman was sent on a mission meant to strengthen alliances and trade relationships. It was not dangerous. It was routine, a journey he had made before. He left home expecting to return. History had other plans. The ambush came without warning. Men burst from the forest. Gunshots shattered the air. Horses screamed, people fell. The world turned into noise, smoke, and confusion. Abdul Rahman fought. But courage does not stop numbers. He was pulled from his horse. Hands grabbed him. Ropes tightened around his arms. Voices shouted in unfamiliar languages. At first he believed it was a mistake. He spoke. He named his family. He explained his position. He expected recognition. Instead, he was given iron. Cold metal closed around his wrists. That iron would become his companion for decades. He was forced to march toward the coast. Days passed, then more days. Each step carried him farther from home, farther from his mother's voice, farther from the courtyard where he had once debated law and faith. The air changed. The smell of salt reached him. Then he saw the ships, floating prisons. He had heard stories. Now he was standing inside one. At the coast, families were torn apart with screaming and fists. Mothers lost children. Husbands lost wives. People begged. Some fought. Some collapsed in shock. This was not chaos. This was business. Abdul Rahman understood something terrible. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a system. He was pushed below deck into darkness. The smell hit first. Sweat, blood, waste, fear. Bodies packed so tightly that breathing felt borrowed. The ceiling was low, the air was thin. People cried in many languages. Some prayed, some cursed, some went silent. Time stopped making sense. People died quietly. Their bodies were removed without ceremony, thrown into the sea like broken tools. Abdul Rahman watched strong men become weak. He watched hope drain from eyes. He felt his own mind push toward the edge. But he did one thing that saved him. He remembered his name. "I am Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Sori." He whispered, not for others, for himself, because he understood something most people did not. If they took his memory, they would not need to break his body. The ship crossed an ocean filled with bones. When land appeared, it was not home. It was a market. Men examined bodies. They checked teeth. They squeezed muscles. They argued over prices. Human lives were reduced to numbers. Abdul Rahman was sold, a scholar, a leader in training. Sold. He was taken to Mississippi. The land was flat and endless. Cotton fields stretched farther than the eye could see. The sun burned. The air pressed down on the lungs. He was given a new name, a slave name, a name that was not his. He did not answer to it in his heart. At first he tried to explain. He spoke with dignity. He spoke calmly. He told them who he was. They laughed. They beat him. They told him Africa did not matter. They told him his past was dead. He learned something painful. Knowledge was dangerous. So he became quiet. Not empty, quiet. Years passed. The work never stopped. Before sunrise, after sunset, cotton tore skin, whips tore flesh. Hunger became normal. Exhaustion became a way of life. Abdul Rahman married a woman named Isabella. She had been taken from Africa as a child. She barely remembered her homeland, but Africa lived in her posture, in her eyes, in her silence. Together they created something fragile, a family. They had children, children born into chains. That pain was deeper than any whip. Abdul Rahman could endure suffering, but watching his children grow up owned by another man broke something inside him that never fully healed. At night he whispered stories of Africa, mountains, rivers, learning, freedom. I was not born a slave, he told them. You were not born slaves. This is not who we are. The world told them otherwise. Most people on the plantation slowly forgot Africa. Languages faded, names were lost, memories softened until they disappeared. Abdul Rahman refused. He wrote Arabic letters in the dirt when no one was watching. He whispered prayers. He taught dignity in secret ways, how to stand, how to look without giving up your soul, how to remember when remembering hurts. Decades passed. His hair turned gray, his back bent, his hands cracked. He became known as a quiet man, not a rebel, not a troublemaker, but not broken. Then, after nearly 40 years, something unexpected happened. A traveling doctor came to the plantation. The doctor heard Abdul Rahman speaking softly to himself. Not English, Arabic. The doctor stopped. He listened again. He approached. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Abdul Rahman looked up. For the first time in decades, he did not lower his eyes. He spoke, slowly, clearly. "I was educated in Africa. I am not what you think I am." The doctor stayed. They talked for hours. Abdul Rahman told him everything. Futa Jalon, his family, his education, his capture, the ship, the years in slavery. The doctor left shaken. For Abdul Rahman, something dangerous was born. Hope, not loud hope, careful hope, the kind that can save a man or destroy him if it dies. Word began to spread. A slave who could read Arabic, a slave who claimed noble origins, a slave who spoke of Africa not as a dream, but as memory. Some believed, some laughed, but some listened. Letters were written. Conversations happened. A story began to move beyond the plantation. Abdul Rahman did not yet know it, but for the first time in nearly 40 years, the world outside the cotton fields had spoken his real name, and that name was about to become dangerous to the system that had tried to erase it. For nearly 40 years, Abdul Rahman had carried the weight of slavery. But now, something stirred in him that he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Not the kind of false hope whispered to slaves to keep them working. This was dangerous, real hope. Hope that could topple fear. Hope that could turn his story into action. Word of him had spread. Newspapers printed tales of the African prince in chains. Diplomats and foreign officials began to notice. His story reached the ears of men who had the power to intervene. And for the first time, Abdul Rahman realized that the world might hear his voice. But even as hope grew, pain remained. His wife Isabella and many of his children were still enslaved. Freedom was partial. Freedom came with sacrifice. He could walk free, but at what cost? Still, Abdul Rahman refused to let despair rule him. He spent the next weeks carefully planning, writing letters, and speaking with anyone who would listen. He spoke to those with influence. He reminded the world that he had been a man of stature and learning in Africa, that he was stolen from his land, yet survived 40 years of brutality with his mind intact and his dignity unbroken. Finally, after months of negotiation, advocacy, and relentless determination, the moment arrived. Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Asori was granted freedom. He stepped off the plantation as an old man. His hair silvered, his back bent, his hands cracked from decades of labor. But in his eyes burned the fire of a man who had survived everything the world tried to erase. For a moment, he simply stood. The wind brushed his face. The sun felt different, not oppressive, but warm. He inhaled as if tasting life itself. He had survived what was meant to destroy him. He was free, but freedom was bittersweet. He had lived 40 years as a slave, 40 years of work, suffering, and pain, and yet even now many of his loved ones remained in chains. His wife, some of his children, even the thought of leaving without them weighed heavier than the iron that had once shackled him. He refused to accept this as the end. He began traveling, speaking, pleading with anyone who would help secure the freedom of his family. He wrote letters, appealed to diplomats, and spoke before officials with a calm but unwavering conviction. "I am not asking for mercy," he said in one of his letters. "I am demanding justice, not for myself alone, but for those who remain chained, whose stories have yet to be told." Meanwhile, in Africa, years of silence and longing had not erased his name. His people remembered the boy who had left for a simple mission and never returned. The mountains, rivers, and trees carried whispers of his legacy. Abdul Rahman refused to allow memory to fade. He taught his children even after gaining freedom, instilling the lessons of courage, knowledge, and resilience. He reminded them, "We are more than the chains they place on our bodies. We are the sum of our thoughts, our prayers, our memories. And no one can ever take that." But the world's systems are slow, cruel, and often indifferent. Many of his appeals were ignored. Some were met with mockery. Yet Abdul Rahman persisted, refusing to give up on family or justice. In 1828, after decades of struggle, some of his family members were finally freed. He arranged for them to join him. But the pain of separation had left scars that would never fully heal. It was time for Abdul Rahman to return to Africa. After 40 years away from home, he set foot once again on African soil. The land felt different, yet familiar. The mountains still carried their ancient wisdom. The rivers whispered the same songs. But the world had changed, and he had changed more. He had survived chains meant to erase him, but the scars of loss, separation, and forced labor were indelible. When he returned, he was not the young man who had left. He was a survivor, a storyteller, a living proof of endurance. His story became a beacon, an example of how courage, dignity, and memory could survive even the darkest attempts to destroy them. He walked through villages that remembered his family. He was greeted with reverence and awe, and yet the pain remained. So many he loved had not survived. So many memories were lost forever. But Abdul Rahman did not despair. He spent his remaining years teaching, guiding, and advocating for his people. He reminded them that no system of cruelty could erase the essence of a human soul, that dignity and knowledge could survive chains, whips, and oceans, that hope, even in the darkest times, was a weapon. He passed away not long after his return, an old man who had survived more than anyone could imagine. But his story lived on. His life answered a question that still echoes in history. What does it take to remain human when the world treats you as property? Abdul Rahman's answer was simple: memory, dignity, resilience. The chains had held his body. They had tried to crush his spirit. They had failed because Abdul Rahman remembered who he was, because he refused to disappear, because he carried Africa in his mind, in his heart, and in his voice. Across oceans, through decades, and into freedom, his legacy endures to this day, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, the human spirit can rise unbroken, unbowed, and undefeated. Abdul Rahman Ibrahim Asori is not just a man from the past. He is a symbol of hope for anyone who has been told they are less than human, a man they could chain but never erase,